you think that any welfare at all is fair? For example, like maternity leave or any welfare when it comes to vacations, people's vacations, or any, do you think any of it should be in place from the government side?
Okay, there we go. So that's the qualifier, right? Because we have to agree on the definition of welfare.
Yeah.
Do I believe that it's fair coming from a government side? No.
Okay.
None of it.
And I was also going to ask you, do you have any like solutions, like alternative solutions for?
Yeah, volunteerism, right? The average Norwegian pays would go around 65, 70%, right? So let's say Liberalistene, we become your leaders tomorrow, okay? And we tell you no more taxation, no more. You don't have to pay anything else. You keep every krona you earn, you take that home, and you decide what you want to do with it, right?
So you are against taxes?
I'm against taxation as well. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Completely?
Yes.
Not even on kind of the civic, what was the term Friedman used? Civic culture. He was talking about like military.
Yeah, so they're right. Let's get one thing straight. I'm not an anarchist, right? I don't believe in no government, right? So, yeah, and I'm not think. Of course, there has to be a reasonable approach to this, right? I'm not saying that I could wake up and let's say I am your leader tomorrow, and I'm just going to pull the rug out from underneath you and say no taxes. No, there has to be a gradual decline in taxation, and I think that the only endeavors that government should be really involved in should have to do with defense, military, police, and an effective judicial oversight. But if we can, we agree now on the definition of welfare, right? Welfare is something that's provided by the government. No, I don't agree with that. And what's the alternative then, right? So we get back to, if I strip away all of your tax obligations, or let's say even I bring it from 70% down to 5%, and I tell you every other krona you earn, you get to take home, right? Now, when I do that for you, because I'm going to take credit for it. When I do that for you, does your desire to help others disappear with your tax obligations? Does your desire not to see homeless people in the street? Does your desire to see children not starving? Does your desire, let's say you are an entrepreneurial guy and you start a company, if the government's there not to hold a gun to your head, does your desire not to let a mother leave when she's about to give birth, does that escape or does that vanish with your tax obligations?
But do you trust the employers and the community as a whole to actually contribute to letting the mothers and to provide for maternity leave and such?
Absolutely.
You think so?
It's not trust, but it has nothing to do with trust. It's in our interest to be that type of society, right? It's of no interest for me to run a business, for example, and not to treat my employees right, to treat them with common decency. I'm not going to have a female employee who gives birth and then call her up the next day, hey, you got to be back in the office on Monday, right? Not only is that bad for her, but if it's bad for her, it's bad for the morale. But it's also, I can't really expect her to come in and be productive in my company and do that. So it's bad for both of us. So even if I look at this on a completely selfish stance, at a completely selfish point of view, it's in my interest to let her have maternity leave, right? And just as it's in my interest to take all that money that I'm getting now that the government's not taking it, it's in my interest to investigate and find the charities that are actually doing their due diligence and making sure that the money that I give them is going to a good cause, that the money I give them is going to what they say it's going to, right? So I am suddenly freed up of 70% of my income, and I want to help people too, because it's in my interest. It's in my interest that my community is taken care of. But this is the problem when government gets so big. We start to lose that sense of community. We start to rely on centralized government. In Norway, for example, which is a cradle-to-grave nanny state, right? From the cradle till we're put in the ground, we rely on the government to be there for us as a safety net in all adversity. The government should be there for us. And when you live in that, and the United States isn't far off either as far as welfare goes. And of course, it's not to the same degree as Norway, but it's the principle still applies. When you get into that type of cradle-to-grave welfare state, you lose that sense of community. And when you lose that sense of community, you lose the sense of responsibility. And then suddenly there's no incentive to actually be productive in society. Because if I can make more sitting at home and waiting for the NAV check, why would I go get a job at McDonald's, right?
I just thought of something interesting. In Utah, one of the most Republican states, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
If taxes completely and welfare completely, I don't think the society would change all that much.
It wouldn't. They're a Mormon state, and
Chicago, on the other hand.
Yeah, Utah wouldn't change that much, and that's a very good point. Utah is primarily a Mormon state, but one of the reasons, I don't think it has much to do with I take that back. It has to do with religion because in certain ways, I mean, Western society is founded on Judeo-Christian values, right? That's you can't deny that. I'm not a religious guy by any stretch of the word religious, but I can't deny that our values are largely based on in a lot of ways based on Greek philosophy, but our values are largely based on Judeo-Christian values. And Utah has a very cohesive sense of community within their state, whereas Chicago, you're very right. But this, when you talk about welfare, for example, you asked me about, Chicago's a great case study for this, right? Chicago is a crime-ridden, one of the murder capitals, firearm crime, ghettos, and all this, right? But they also are in these areas where this type of crime and drug use and gang activity, all this is happening. These are also this is also a lot of where the welfare is going, right? And this is where a lot of the government housing exists. So when you give someone just the bare minimum to survive, and then you keep giving that to them, what incentive do they really have to go out and better themselves and the community around them on their own as an individual contributor to the society in which they reside? There is no incentive. And you have a lot of states, last time I checked, I know it's more, I haven't checked in several years now. Last time I checked, there was 11 states in the United States where there were more people on welfare than there were employed. 11 states. And I'd be interested in looking at similar statistics for Norway. I think at one point I checked, it was 1 out of every 3rd Norwegian was receiving some kind of government aid.